Hello folks, thank you for stopping by to check out my channel. This is Civil War Reports, and if you are interested in the American Civil War, this channel may be for you. So please show this channel your love. Give me a big, huge thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Today I am back on the Gettysburg battlefield, and I'm going to bring you another episode about the Battle of Gettysburg. Hello and welcome back to my channel, Civil War Reports. I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. And today we're going to continue on with my series about the Battle of Gettysburg. You know, when we last met, well, we discussed how General Archer and General Davis first engaged Union cavalry here at Gettysburg, but things didn't go very well for the Confederates, and when General Davis retreated down the railroad cut, that ushered in a time period on the battlefield here known as the noontime lull. Well, what time did it actually start? Conflicting reports. I've seen some say that the noontime lull started as early as 11:30, others as late as 11:45, and it went on for a period of about 2 hours. And during that time there was no major fighting, but what there was some sporadic exchange of cannon fire, and both sides used that time to, well, figure out what each side was going to do next. The Union Army used it as a time to strengthen their position and call up for reinforcements, and General Heath also used that time to, well, size up what was done incorrectly and prepare for the next attack. Or maybe not. We're going to see how situation got out of control, out of hand, and maybe a battle that might have been avoided, well, it wasn't. But before I get into that, I do want to answer a question from a loyal viewer. When I last left off of my series on the Battle of Gettysburg, I talked about General Davis's brigade and their fight here just north of and a little bit south of the railroad cut, and I left off with saying how they were pushed out by a joint effort of the 6th Wisconsin, 95th New York, and 14th Brooklyn, sent down the railroad cut, and many of Davis's men were either captured or killed, the ones that were unable to get away. And gentleman who always seems to leave a very nice comment after every one of my episodes asked the question, did General Davis get his position due to nepotism? And what did his soldiers think of him? Well, it was easy to answer the first part, a little difficult getting an answer for the second. Did General Davis get his position due to nepotism? If the name sounds familiar, it is because General Joseph Robert Davis was a nephew of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. And, well, spoiler alert, I'm going to come right out and say it. In my opinion, did he get his position due to nepotism? In my opinion, the answer is yes. What do we know about General Davis? Well, briefly, before the war, he's educated as a lawyer. He does not attend West Point or VMI or the Citadel or any other major military college in the South before the war. He's a lawyer, he's a politician, he serves very briefly in a local militia before the war, and when the war comes, he's made a captain in the 10th Mississippi. Now that's not unusual. It was not unusual at this time for educated gentlemen who have some formal education to become a captain or a major or even a colonel of a regiment. You didn't have to have military experience. But what happens after that, I think we could make a good argument for nepotism. He quickly rises up the ranks. He serves with the 10th Mississippi. They're assigned in Florida under General Braxton Bragg. He rises up the ranks to lieutenant colonel, and then on August 21st, 1861, he's made a colonel of the regiment. Again, not unusual for somebody who's well educated to advance up the ranks like that, to start off as an officer and advance up the ranks. But after becoming colonel, he's then transferred to Richmond and becomes aide-de-camp to his uncle, President Jefferson Davis. The 10th Mississippi will go on to fight at Shiloh. Davis will not be there. He sees very little in the way of real combat before being made his uncle's aide-de-camp. As aide-de-camp, he's going to travel around the South with his uncle visiting troops. He's going to tour the South and see what's going on. Then, after the death of Stonewall Jackson at the Battle of Chancellorsville, Lee reorganizes his army and creates the new Third Corps, and this is where the nepotism kicks in. Colonel Joseph Robert Davis becomes Brigadier General Davis and is given command of a brigade. He never really led a regiment in battle. Now he's going to be leading a brigade. His brigade will consist of 4 regiments, the 2nd and 42nd Mississippi, as well as the 55th North Carolina. Those 3 regiments will be here at Gettysburg. As for his 4th regiment, well, I already discussed that the 11th Mississippi on July 1st was back in Cashtown guarding wagons. Let's take a look what happens to Davis and the 11th Mississippi later on in the battle. So what about that other regiment from Davis's brigade, the 11th Mississippi? They weren't there for fighting on July 1st, but they would be there in time for Pickett's charge on July 3rd. It was also during Pickett's charge that General Davis would be wounded. After the battle, he would develop typhoid fever, which was potentially dangerous, potentially deadly. 1862, General McClellan suffered from typhoid, was very sick for a long time, and around that same time that he was suffering from typhoid, President Abraham Lincoln's son Willie died from typhoid fever. So typhoid was very, it was a potentially deadly fever. And so, well, as a result of Gettysburg and developing typhoid, General Lee considered removing Davis from command, but he didn't do it out of fear of upsetting Confederate President Jefferson Davis. So was there nepotism when it came to General Davis? In my opinion, yes. As for the second part of the question, what did the troops think of him? And this is why it took so long to get back on this answer, is I really couldn't find anything, one way or another, what the troops thought of him, which leads me to believe that he was a mediocre general. I couldn't find anybody singing his praises, and I couldn't find anybody really disparaging him. So it leads me to think he was just at best a mediocre general. But he would be with the Army of Northern Virginia till the end. He would be there for the Wilderness. He'd be there for the Siege of Petersburg. He'd be there at Appomattox. But again, I could not find anything in any books or anything online, one way or another, what the troops had to say about him. So, in my opinion, was there nepotism? Yes, overwhelming evidence. What did the troops think about him? Sorry, I can't say. Can't say. But I am going to say this much here. I'm going to get back on my soapbox here about monuments. If my memory is correct, this monument was placed here on the Gettysburg battlefield. I'm on West Confederate Avenue. I'm not too far from the North Carolina Monument if you want to come and visit this one. If I'm not mistaken, this was placed here in April of year 2000, which means that less than 25 years ago from the time of this filming, which is being done on October 7th in the year 2024, less than 25 years ago, we were placing monuments to Confederates. And here we are less than 25 years later, and people want to tear them down. Sorry. This is a piece of history. Like it, like what they stood for or not, this is a piece of American history. The story needs to be told. If we're only going to tell stories about Americans who were flawless, our history books would be blank pages. After the retreat of General Davis's brigade and General Archer's brigade, they basically returned to their starting point here at Hers Ridge. And both sides used this lull in the battle, what I like to refer to as the noontime lull. And they used the time to redeploy, figure out what to do next, and particularly in the case of General Abner Doubleday's First Corps, to strengthen their position as best they could with the limited manpower he had to await another Confederate onslaught. Now, I don't know, because I wasn't there, and unfortunately he died before he was able to get back to the safety of Virginia after the Battle of Gettysburg. But I would like to think human nature at this point in time, whether he was saying it aloud or at least to himself, that General Pettigrew must have been saying, yeah, I told you so. You got to remember, on June 30th, less than 24 hours prior to what was happening here, General Pettigrew attempted to go to Gettysburg, but saw Yankee cavalry, went back to Cashtown to report on it. I did an episode on that already. And even though he was there and saw it with his own eyes, two generals who were not there and did not see it with their own eyes, General Heath, who was Pettigrew's division commander, and General A.P. Hill, their corps commander, both denied that Yankee cavalry could be in Gettysburg. It would only be local militia or home guard at best. General Lee, remember, wants to avoid a general engagement before the army is concentrated, and unfortunately, we have the makings for a general engagement. Now, had they broken off, and the Confederates just went back to Cashtown, it would have been a small Union victory, but this is not a what if. We're dealing with reality here. And so both sides use this time to strengthen their positions or figure out what to do next. So what does Heath do? Well, he's already used two of his brigades, Archer and Davis. He brings up his other two brigades. Pettigrew, who basically is going to form up where Archer's brigade did earlier, and Colonel Brockenbrough is going to form up where Davis's brigade was. What's left of Archer's brigade is going to be on the extreme right of Heath's line, and he's also going to use this time to call on his other division commander that's in the area. That is under the command of William Dorsey Pender, and Pender is going to get his division online, but they're still not sure what to do. Things will change when other Confederates arrive on the field. But let's take a look at what's going on with their superiors, General Hill and General Robert E. Lee. I'm not sure if I mentioned this already, and if I haven't, well, I'm sorry for not doing my due diligence. But one thing about the Battle of Gettysburg is you got to keep in mind that not only was this battle unplanned, it was not started with either army commander on site. Not only that, it wasn't even started with a corps commander on site. The battle was opened up by division commanders. General Heath of the Confederacy, he was a major general, and he commanded a division of A.P. Hill's 3rd Corps. And playing defense was another division commander, Brigadier General John Buford, who commanded a division of cavalry. So there weren't, shall we say, the upper echelons of either army present on scene. General A.P. Hill was about 8 miles away with his headquarters here at the Cashtown Inn. On the defensive side, the closest corps commander was General Reynolds, who was barely above the Mason-Dixon line out the Emmitsburg Road. But it was here that A.P. Hill had his headquarters. It was in this general area that the decision was made on June 30th to go to Gettysburg in the first place. And Hill was very sickly, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, and he doesn't really move with any great alacrity until he's basically ordered to, which we'll also talk about very shortly. So on the morning of July 1st, General Lee made his way through Cashtown Gap here in South Mountain on his way to the town of Cashtown to meet with his 3rd Corps commander, General A.P. Hill. And as Lee was coming through the gap, that is when he started to hear the sound of cannon fire off in the distance. And of course this was a little upsetting to him because one of his orders were to avoid a general engagement. So he then hastens his journey to Cashtown to meet with A.P. Hill, whose headquarters were at the Cashtown Inn. General Hill had established his headquarters at the Cashtown Inn over there, and the two generals met. And Lee had a lot of questions, and unfortunately Hill had very few answers. And as a result of this meeting, even though A.P. Hill was not feeling well, he was confined in many ways to a sick bed. Apparently the gonorrhea he caught while a young cadet at West Point, coming back from his home in Virginia. He stopped off in New York City in 1844 and, well, got himself a case of the love bug, and many believe that his gonorrhea was flaring up here at the time of the Gettysburg campaign. He comes out of the Cashtown Inn, doesn't have much to say about to General Lee. Lee's not happy because, remember, Lee said avoid a general engagement. What we do know is this: A.P. Hill mounts up and at a very quick pace starts heading towards the sound of the gunfire. This is before the noontime lull. And Lee would follow him at a slower gait. Got to point out, Hill's action here at the Battle of Gettysburg is somewhat of a mystery. His after-action report is very vague, and historians really since Gettysburg have been grinding their teeth and pulling their hair out trying to figure out what A.P. Hill actually did at Gettysburg, and that is beyond the scope of today's episode. That's, I promise you, I'm gonna get more into that in the future. We don't know exactly when Hill will arrive on the battlefield, but, well, we just don't know. His after-action report is very vague. I'm currently standing in front of the statue here for General Abner Doubleday, and during the noon lull, this man was extremely active. He was very busy strengthening his line, doing the best he could, stretching it out to meet possible Confederate attacks coming in from the north. Because you got to remember, General Buford was very good about sending out troopers to the north of town, and that's when they learned that a sizable Confederate force, part of the 2nd Corps under General Lull, was going to be coming down from the north. And Doubleday, the 1st Corps was here alone for a long time. He sends out messages to General Howard to bring up the 11th Corps. Howard does send off messages to the 3rd Corps commander, General Dan Sickles. Also did an episode about the 12th Corps, which was only about 5 or 6 miles away from Cemetery Hill. And I already explained in that episode that General Slocum was lived up to his name, Slow Come. He was very slow to come here to Gettysburg. And got to keep in mind, too, those corps were also some of the smallest in the Union Army here at Gettysburg, each one of them numbering under 10,000 each. Doubleday really, when it was needed for him to shine, he really does come through here at Gettysburg. But I'm going to do a whole episode just on Doubleday. He's really going to get the short end of the stick. But what is important is that he uses this noontime lull to strengthen the Union line as best he could. When General Howard arrived on the field, or should I say in Gettysburg, he was pretty much immediately notified that he was going to be the overall commander due to the death of General Reynolds. And he wanted to get as best a view of the battlefield. A young kid in town who was around the age of 13 told him to go to this building. It served as a warehouse, the Fonstock building, as it was the tallest building in Gettysburg. Young Daniel Skelly, too young to serve in the war, but old enough to know all the good places to play, told him to go to the top floor, go to the roof, which Howard did. And from there, he did have a pretty good view of the battlefield, as I mentioned, this is was the tallest building in town. And it is widely believed that while up there, that's when he noticed Doubleday pulling some of his troops back to fortify his lines, which would later result in a lot of the hardship that General Doubleday would suffer here at Gettysburg. And again, it's widely believed that this happened. He scaled to the roof during the noontime lull. I am now basically at the end of what would have been the line of the First Corps on July 1st. Doubleday extended the Corps out as far as he could because he knew from reports from Buford's cavalry that there were going to be Confederates coming down from the north. I'm standing in front of one of three observation towers here at the Gettysburg battlefield. This is the smallest one. It's on Oak Ridge. Let's go up it in a few minutes. I'll give you a slow-flying bird's eye view of the battlefield here. And way, way off in the distance, hope you can see it, is the Eternal Peace Light. That was placed where it's placed for a very important reason. I'm going to explain that also in a few moments. Let's go up that tower. All right, my friends, this is the Union line that was developed during the noontime lull, and it extended almost out as far as the Mummersburg Road there. And again, this is the smallest of the three towers that are here at the Gettysburg battlefield. This one here on Oak Ridge. Should point out, there's no elevator, so if you're of limited mobility, unfortunately you may not be able to get to enjoy these towers. Again, being the smallest one, I guess you could say this is a low-flying bird's eye view of the battlefield. Now, I want to point out that I took the tour guide exam back in December of 2015 and took some classes that were conducted by tour guides, and they told me that this part of the battlefield is probably the most altered part. What you see here is a lot what it did not look like on July 1st, 1863. Okay. But again, this would have been the area that the Union Army, as best they could, would have tried to strengthen and fortify before the Confederates coming from the north hit the battlefield. Well, off in the distance, there's the Peace Light. We've been there before. Now, the Peace Light was put there at the 75th anniversary. It was lit by on July of 1938. It was placed there because that is the area in which General Rhodes's division would come out of the woods and the battle would be renewed. The noontime lull would come to an end. So let's take a look at General Rhodes, General Ewell's decision when they arrived here on the battlefield that would bring the noontime lull to an end. I am just north of Gettysburg. The sign you just read is right behind me, and I have the Carlisle Road to my left and Hares Ridge Road to my right. And it was here at this intersection that General Rhodes, along with General Ewell, turned his division and headed down Hares Ridge Road. As recently as just a few days before, June 28th, Ewell was up in Carlisle with two of his divisions, Rhodes and the other one under the command of Allegheny Johnson. And that's when Ewell receives notice from General Lee that he wants to concentrate his army here at the Gettysburg or Cashtown area. Gettysburg or Cashtown. That will come into play. And Ewell was devising a plan to capture Harrisburg, and had he captured it, it would have been the first and probably only Union capital occupied by the Confederate Army during the war. But nevertheless, he brings his army down here. He can hear in the distance the cannon fire and decides to turn down Hares Ridge Road, because that would put him close to Gettysburg, but also near Cashtown. And once they arrive on Oak Hill, well, we're going to see how General Ewell really decides the fate of the Confederacy, shall we say. Monument for General Rhodes's division up here on Oak Hill, right next to the Eternal Peace Light. As I mentioned, this was dedicated at the 75th reunion in 1938, and this spot was chosen because, well, it's the highest point on the Gettysburg battlefield on day one, and it was also here that the battle was renewed. The noontime lull came to an end with the arrival of General Rhodes and his corps commander, General Ewell. I'm currently standing next to the Peace Light, and from here you really do have a good view of much of the area that was fought over on the morning of July 1st. And it was here that General Ewell would decide to renew the battle. And I read a quote years ago that after the war, General Ewell supposedly made when he said, "There was a lot of mistakes made at the Battle of Gettysburg, and I made most of them." I'm standing up on Oak Hill. Peace Light is at about a 10 o'clock position, only about maybe about 100 or so feet in front of me. And I'm standing in between two British-made Whitworth breech-loading cannon, which the Confederacy did have two of them here at the battle. So it is in the woods behind me that Rhodes's division would have come out on. Iverson's men would have come out to my right, and it was basically here that General Ewell would make the decision to renew the battle. This was probably the last chance the Confederacy had to avoid a major engagement here at Gettysburg, which was General Lee's objective all along, to avoid a major engagement until the Confederate Army was concentrated. And by the afternoon of July 1st, the Confederate Army was not concentrated. But even with the arrival of the 11th Corps, which is going to be happening real soon, they still outnumbered the Union Army. So the odds were in the Confederates' favor. Well, I really hope you enjoyed this episode on the noontime lull. Really very little fighting, not even a lot, just occasionally sporadic cannon fire going back and forth. But it was a very important time because it was during this time that the Union fortifies its position as best it could. We get the arrival of the 11th Corps coming on the scene, and also the decisions made by the Confederate Army. A major engagement could have been avoided at least at two different junctures, with the repulse of Archer and Davis's brigades, and when Ewell arrived here on the field. We could have avoided at least two times a major engagement. When we pick up again, I'll continue what happens after the noontime lull is lifted. I hope you'll join me for those episodes. I'm going to continue on as best I can chronologically with the Battle of Gettysburg. And in doing the research for this episode, I realize I'm probably going to have to do a separate episode on General Abner Doubleday, because in my opinion he really gets the short end of the stick here at Gettysburg. But that's for another episode. I want to thank you all for watching. And if you like what you saw today, please hit the subscribe button, give a thumbs up. Also, notify your friends, let them know about this channel, and ask them to subscribe as well. If you like, you may leave a question or a comment below, and perhaps I will answer your question in a future episode of Civil War Reports. Until next time, please keep the history alive.